Roller coasters come in different sizes and lengths. For some states in the USA, their longest coaster may be amongst the longest in the world, while for some other states, their longest coaster may hardly even count as a coaster. For this episode of State of Stats, we will visit each state in the USA and take a look at some of the longest and not so longest coasters in the country. This is State of Stats, the longest operating coaster in each state. As we travel through the states, there may be a few coasters that are no longer with us, but they were longer than the current longest operating coaster in the state. Wherever it applies, I'll mention those coasters as well. This isn't a ranking video series, so as always, we will go in alphabetical order by state. If you want a top 15 list for this topic, skip to, well, maybe there will be a list, maybe there won't be a list. Guess you have to stick around and find out, won't you? Now before we embark on another road trip around the country, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Drop a massive like and thumbs up on the video too. You guys have been doing a great job at keeping the YouTube algorithm at bay, but he's still fighting, so we can't stop fighting either. Alright, it's time to use all these legs in my favor. Come here. Because that's totally how that works in real life, isn't it? Anywho, let's embark. Alabama. Rampage at Alabama Adventure would take this title, but as of this video, it is still standing but not operating, or SBNL. Rampage is 3,500 feet long, but for now, the title will go to Rolling Thunder at Tropic Falls, being 2,243.3 feet long. This coaster looks pretty, that's probably about it, if it's anything like Thunderbolt at Luna Park. Alaska. Aftershock at the Alaska State Fair is 1,148.3 feet long. This coaster has been mentioned in every episode of the series so far, being the only coaster in Alaska's history, so let's not waste any more time with this one. Arizona. Canyon Coaster, being 5,280 feet long. This is the first of many mountain coasters that we will see in this video. For some reason, some people don't count mountain coasters as real coasters. Well, I do. If you don't, then go ahead and make your own version of this video. Have a nice day. Arkansas. Arkansas Twister at Magic Springs is 3,340 feet long. I'm reluctant to choose this one, because this was SBNL when I visited the park in 2023, and I can't figure out if it's reopened since then or not. If this hasn't reopened yet, then it would be Big Bad John at the same park, being 2,349 feet long. If you know the current operating status of Arkansas Twister, please let me know in the comments. California. Incredicoaster at Disney's California Adventure is 6,072 feet long. This is also the longest coaster in the Disney chain. I'm surprised that this is at a Disney park. I thought this ride was very intense by Disney standards. I'll never understand what they were trying to go for with this coaster. It's a coaster that looks like Coney Island Cyclone, but it has a launch and a launch lift hill and a loop. Okay, Disney, go off, I guess. Colorado. The longest coaster to ever operate in Colorado was Outlaw Mountain Coaster, being 6,281 feet long. This coaster closed in 2022. So the longest operating coaster in Colorado now is Rocky Mountain Coaster, being 5,800 feet long. Connecticut. Back on this list yet again is Lake Compounce. Each time with a different coaster. This time, Boulder Dash makes the cut, being 4,725 feet long. I have a love-hate relationship with this ride. The layout and pacing is fantastic on this ride, but I found it extremely difficult to re-ride. I rode this in 2022 before the GCI Titan track was added to the ride, so maybe it's much more tolerable now. One of these days I'll make it back to Lake Compounce. Florida. Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind is 5,572.4 feet long. As of right now, this is also the most expensive coaster ever built, costing around $500 million. I find that a little hard to believe, but I found many sources saying that. Once again, go off, Disney. Georgia. Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia is 4,480 feet long. I've shared my thoughts on this coaster and I'll say it again. I wish B&M would make more rides like this. This ride is drugs. But these days, B&M is like,
no, we're okay.
Idaho. Glade Runner at Bogus Basin Mountain Resort is 4,333 feet long. That doesn't sound all too bogus to me. I know that sucked. Deal with it. Illinois. Raging Bull at Six Flags Great America is 5,057 feet long. While it's not the most impressive B&M hyper out there in my opinion, it's still a lot of fun. Definitely one of the more unique B&M hypers. Indiana. Voyage at Holiday World is 6,442 feet long. Can't say this is much of a surprise. This coaster is a true engineering marvel, being the second longest wooden coaster in the world. We'll see the longest one later in this video. Iowa. Tornado at Adventureland is 2,840 feet long. While being one of the shorter major coasters on this list, this coaster still packs a punch in its shorter layout. Front row, all day, every day for this coaster. Kansas. Home to more Little Dippers than you could ever dream of. None of them have their heights listed anywhere, but they're all very similar in length or the same. So let's just say all the Little Dippers are the longest coaster in the state, because Kansas has nothing better going for it. Wait, not even a number? That's a little harsh, isn't it? Okay, fine. The average Allen Herschel Little Dipper was about 200 to 300 feet long. But Kansas, do better. Kentucky. The longest coaster in the state's history was Chang, being 4,155 feet long. This was relocated to Great Adventure in 2011, and well, we all know what happened. The longest coaster in Kentucky now is Thunder Run. Oh, wait a minute. I mean, Woodland Run, being 2,850 feet long. Not the worst, not the greatest, it's just okay. Hey, change that name. That's better, I guess. Louisiana. Mega Zeph at Six Flags New Orleans was the longest coaster in the state's history, being 4,000 feet long. Ironic that this coaster closed permanently due to a flood, then somehow catches fire later on. Not fishy at all. The longest coaster in Louisiana now is Raging Cajun, being 1,565 feet long. It's a Vekoma boomerang. Nothing exciting here. Moving on. Maine. Excalibur makes it into the series yet again, being 2,700 feet long. As I've said in previous episodes in this series, the first half is great, the second half is just okay. Maryland. Superman Ride of Steel at Six Flags America returns to this series being 5,350 feet long. Again, not the greatest hyper, not the worst hyper. It's just okay, with a solid finale. It's just like the Baltimore Ravens. Exciting at first, but just kind of falls flat. At least it's more exciting and more reliable than that one Steelers coaster, which is even more fitting for the team that it's themed after. I don't follow football anymore, but when I did, I was a Steelers fan, and I still gotta admit, they suck. Massachusetts. Hey, not so fast, Superman. You almost made it. But Thunderbolt Mountain Coaster has you beat, being 5,450 feet long. You lost by 50 feet. That's almost as painful as your terrible restraints. But I get why you have them, but still, they're not fun. As for Thunderbolt Mountain Coaster, it's just that, a mountain coaster. And not even close to the last one that we'll see today. Michigan. Shivering Timbers at Michigan's Adventure is 5,383 feet long. And this ride feels every bit that long. This ride just never seems to end, which can be good and bad. This coaster can be a little tough to re-ride over and over again. But once you learn how to brace yourself on this ride, it's much easier to marathon. Minnesota. Wild Thing at Valley of Fair is 5,460 feet long, which might as well be 5,460 feet of straight track. Okay, maybe that's a little harsh, but you get my point. The sensation of speed on this ride is good, I guess. But I do feel like you could ride this coaster without a restraint and be fine. But hey, at least it looks cool. Mississippi. Tornado at Big Play Entertainment Center is listed at 70 meters or 229.6 feet. Nothing mind-blowing here. On to the next. Missouri. Mamba at Worlds of Fun is 5,600 feet long. As long as the mid-course brake run doesn't hit too hard, this is a solid and super fun hypercoaster. And the new repaint looks amazing too. Montana. The only operating coaster in this state is Flathead Lake Alpine Coaster, being about 4,000 feet long. I couldn't find an exact length of the coaster anywhere, but it's the only operating coaster in the state, so there's no competition. Nebraska. The longest coaster in the state's history was actually the very first coaster to open in the state, Griffith Scenic Railway. This was an out-and-back quasi-Mobius loop scenic railway coaster that was about 4,200 feet long. This opened in 1898 and only operated until 1899. Over a century later, and Nebraska has not been able to build any coasters longer than that. The longest operating coaster in Nebraska today is Tim's Runaway Grain Wagons, being 301 feet long. This is a Zamperla family coaster. I say bring back the scenic railway. If you want to see the first coaster to open in every state, check out this video. Nevada. Big Apple Coaster in Las Vegas is 4,777 feet long. This may be the longest and tallest operating coaster in Nevada, but it's still a piece of junk. Moving on. New Hampshire. Another mountain coaster makes it onto this list, with Nor'easter Mountain Coaster, being 4,300 feet long. This looks like a pretty standard mountain coaster. If you've ridden this one, comment down below how it is. New Jersey. Returning to the disaster of a park that is Great Adventure, for Nitro, being 5,394 feet long. This is a hit or miss B&M hyper, but my later rides on it were impressive. Just give it a new paint job already, will ya? New Mexico. Screaming Eagle. Nope, not that one. The mountain coaster one. There you go. This mountain coaster is 5,100 feet long. This is a rare mountain coaster that isn't from Wiegand, who is commonly known for mountain coasters. This one was made by Aquatic Development Group, who's made 12 mountain coasters around the country. New York. Speaking of Aquatic Development Group, here's another one of their coasters, Cliffside Coaster, being 7,600 feet long. This is also the longest coaster in not only the country, but in North America. This coaster follows the path of the 1932 and 1980 Olympic bobsled run. North Carolina. Fury 325, being 6,602 feet long. Can't say this one's much of a surprise either, being the longest steel coaster in the country. I said this in a video a long time ago, but I'll say it again. Fury 325 is the Mona Lisa of B&M. North Dakota. Runaway Train, being the only coaster to ever open in North Dakota. I couldn't figure out the length of this coaster, but since it's the only coaster to ever open in the state, that doesn't really matter. Ohio, Beast, being 7,361 feet long. Love it or hate it, it's the world's longest wooden coaster, and the second longest coaster in the country. And in my opinion, it's the best night ride in the country. Oklahoma. The longest coaster in Oklahoma's history was Scenic Railway, being 4,000 feet long. This was also the very first coaster to ever be built in Oklahoma, opening in 1906. The longest operating coaster in Oklahoma today is Wildcat at Frontier City, being 2,653 feet long. This is a simple out-and-back wooden coaster, originally opening at Fairyland Park in 1967, and moved to Frontier City in 1991. Oregon. Yet another state where the longest coaster in their history was also their very first coaster ever. Scenic Railway at Oaks Amusement Park opened in 1906 and was 3,000 feet long. The longest operating coaster in the state today is Ice Mountain Bobsled, being 1,600 feet long. This was in the previous episode of this series. This looks like a very bizarre coaster. Pennsylvania. Steel Force at Dorney Park is 5,600 feet long. I've always loved this coaster, even before my enthusiast days. I still believe that this is the best Cedar Fair Morgan Hyper coaster out there. And as I'm recording this, I'm realizing that every Cedar Fair Morgan Hyper made it onto this list. Good job, Cedar Fair. South Carolina. RCDB will list Swamp Fox as the longest operating coaster in the state, but I'm going to take the same approach that I did back in my tallest operating coaster video in this series. In my opinion, the longest operating coaster in South Carolina is Thunder Striker at Carowinds, being 5,316 feet long. While this coaster is listed and addressed as a North Carolina coaster, the entirety of the coaster, including the station, is all within South Carolina. If you don't agree with this logic, then sure, Swamp Fox would be the longest operating coaster in the state, being 2,640 feet long. Take your pick. Also, if you don't include Thunder Striker as a South Carolina coaster, then the longest coaster in South Carolina's history would have been Hurricane at Myrtle Beach Pavilion, which was 3,800 feet long. This was a CCI wooden coaster, technically a hybrid coaster, having steel supports and a wooden track. This closed with the park in 2006, and its trains were bought by Kings Island to be used for Son of Beast. South Dakota, Rushmore Mountain Coaster, being 2,477 feet long. Also kind of short for a mountain coaster, probably as disappointing as Mount Rushmore itself, because nothing says America like desecrating a mountainside. Tennessee. Wild Stallion at Skyline Ranch is 6,600 feet long. Even though Rocky Top Mountain Coaster claims to be the longest coaster in the state, I think they're only claiming the ride duration, since it has 4 lift hills. The track itself is only 3,887.8 feet long. Wild Stallion is a fun mountain coaster. I'm just not too big on its setting. It's on a large hill with practically no trees or vegetation, so you don't get that woodsy mountain coaster vibe on it. But it's a pretty fast-paced ride, and gets pretty out of control if you just ride without touching the brakes. Texas. Titan at Six Flags Over Texas is 5,312 feet long. It may be tall and long, but it isn't the most thrilling ride in my opinion. Just proves that stats and numbers don't always lead to an amazing ride. Utah. For the first time in this series for this state, we are breaking away from Lagoon. Mountain Coaster at Park City is 3,887.8 feet long. I've heard a lot of good things about this mountain coaster. I wanted to try catching a ride on it when I visited Lagoon, but just couldn't find the time to stop by sadly. By the looks of it, this definitely looks like it's worth paying a visit to. Vermont. This state only has 2 operating coasters, one of them being Timber Ripper Mountain Coaster, which I've mentioned in a few times in this series before. Time for the other coaster in this state to shine, with Beast Mountain Coaster being 4,800 feet long. This looks like a decent mountain coaster. Nothing outstanding, but looks like it has a nice setting. Virginia. I-305 or Pantherian at King's Dominion, being 5,100 feet long. This ride doesn't feel that long when you're on it, but when you're ripping through the layout as fast as this ride does, that makes perfect sense. To this day, this is still the most intense coaster that I've been on. And that new paint job? Big fan. Washington. Dipper at Playland Park was the longest coaster in the state's history, being 3,400 feet long. This was an out-and-back wooden coaster that opened in 1930 and closed with the park in 1961. The longest operating coaster in Washington today is Tomb Raider Twister, being 2,870 feet long. A little on the shorter side for a mountain coaster, but this looks like it has a very nice setting. West Virginia. There's a mountain coaster that was supposed to open in 2024, but it has yet to open. Its name is unknown, but it's 3,400 feet long. If it opens this year, it can claim that title. But for now, it'll go to Big Dipper at Camden Park, being 1,800 feet long. Wisconsin. Hades 360 at Mount Olympus is 4,746 feet long. This is the most aggressive wooden coaster that I've been on. It's super fun for about 5 rides or so. Then it just becomes a headache. Despite that, this is still a top tier wooden coaster in my opinion. And for our usual disappointing finale for this series, Wyoming will give us its only operating coaster, Cowboy Coaster, which, surprise surprise, is a mountain coaster, being 3,280 feet long. And there you have it, that's the longest operating coaster in each state. Did anything here surprise you? There were definitely a few that I wasn't expecting. What stats do you guys want to see in this series next? Let me know in the comments down below. If you made it this far into the video, congratulations. You've earned a free subscription to the channel. All you had to do is hit that subscribe button to claim your prize. Oh, you're already subscribed? Well, in that case, here's a top 15 list that I didn't promise earlier. Alright guys, I've wrapped the video up here. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you in the next loop.